So, as we have also already heard from our initial presentation, we know that across the world, the deltas are among the most dynamic and valuable landscapes we have, home to hundreds of people, centers of agricultural economic productivity, and also extraordinary biodiversity. We will see in this session from Mekong to Mississippi, Paraná, deltas sustain national economies. They feed populations and serve as gateways also for trade and transport. However, there are significant challenges delta management are facing. There are different geographies, cultures, governance systems, which at the same time share a common reality. This session will bring 4 different case studies to illustrate how the different regions in the world tackle these challenges that deltas are facing, blending science, governance, and participation to keep deltas both productive and livable. The objective is to learn from this diversity, learn from their experiences, and derive some lessons for all of our particular delta management challenges. So I would like to start with introducing Jennifer Sara. She will present an overview of global deltas and delta plan implementation, lessons from a practitioner. She will present how long-term resiliency depends on institutions capable of evolving, combining scientific foresight, stable funding, and multi-level collaboration. Jennifer, you have the floor. I remind you 20 minutes.
If you want, you can also stay standing while I speak. It doesn't matter, but more than welcome. It's really, actually, it's so delightful to be here. I'm privileged. I'm honored to be joining this esteemed group. I mean, it's a great group. It's such a diversity, multidisciplinary, from all around the world, multi-generational, multi-gender. So fantastic. And thank you very much. It's my first time on one of these forums, and I'm just delighted. I think all of us are here because we really care about and strive to achieve a sustainable and equitable water secure world. And we're looking at the ways to do it for everyone on the planet, nature, all the people on the planet. And this forum is really, really critical. Where do you bring together evidence-based policy, how science can influence policy? But where I come from is much more on the practitioner side. How can this also guide implementation and investment decisions? So I think that's also important. So that's my curiosity about a lot of this work. So I will give a quick a presentation. I was asked initially to speak about, give an overview of global deltas around the world. So I'll just do a couple slides on that. You guys are much greater experts on that than I am. I do want to then move into presenting a framework where you can actually bring together all the different elements when you think about putting together science and stakeholders and policies and implementation. How do you do an adaptive learning? And give 2 examples, Mekong Delta one and one from the Bangladesh, and then wrap up with a few policy takeaways. So in terms of, I don't need to stress to this crowd the importance of river deltas. It's interesting because they only collectively make up less than 1% of the planet's surface. I mean, and then again, the interesting thing when I was preparing this presentation is to see how there wasn't a fully consistent definition or methodology, I'm looking at Eduardo, to how do you actually measure a delta and the size of a delta and the area of the delta. And that's because not just because they're constantly changing, but you just have what's part is above water, what's below water. And so that also struck me that when you're trying to get what are the biggest deltas in the world or what is the cumulative size of deltas, that there wasn't this common approach. But so and again, I defer to people in the room, but I just basically said, well, let me take the Edmonds work from 2020 and use that as a baseline just so we can have some kind of anchor. But I know other people might want to change it because it does change what comes first, what doesn't. But basically what that says is that there's about 1,178 deltas that are bigger than 1 square kilometer. That's out of 10,000. Some people say there's 10,000 deltas globally, but less than 1,200 that are bigger than a kilometer, and 48 that are really can be considered the mega deltas, the biggest deltas in the world. So that's what you see here, thanks to Utrecht University. So using this Emmons data set, I think that was the point. There's significant country differences, not, in how much the delta space occupies in the country and how important it is to the country. So if we look at the largest deltas, we can see, and again, this is interesting because you'll see the Amazon first. I'm glad there's no one here from Bangladesh or India, because actually, if you look at the Bangladesh, Ganges, Brahmaputra, they're actually, that I think is the biggest delta in terms of area size, but this data just has the Bangladesh side because I was going to speak about a Bangladesh case study. And the Amazon is 100,000 square kilometers, whereas the total of Ganga, Brahmaputra is about 105 square kilometers. So then it goes down, of course, the Yangtze and the leaner are the next ones that come in terms of size, Indus and Mekong, Mississippi, Niger. So these are just the largest in area. Now, what does that really matter? And in terms of, you look at the percentage of a country, it really, many countries, most deltas represent less than 5, even 2% of the total area of the country. So even to get the importance of deltas into national planning, if you just look at the areas, it's something that often gets neglected, despite their incredible importance in terms of population and GDP, which we'll get to in a second. But however, there's the outliers. Again, the Brahmaputra in Bangladesh covers almost 70% of the country. And the Mekong, we also have a huge amount, 20% of, or 18% of Vietnam in the Mekong Delta. Again, there are other deltas that are not so large in area size, but they cover 25% of the country, like the Netherlands, if you look at the Rhine. So again, this is not a precise measurement, but I think that was just important, that one way to measure deltas and their size and their importance is area, but the other one is really looking at populations. And there's a huge variety in the population, and the most populated deltas, not to surprise, the 8 most populated deltas in the world are in Asia. The Yangtze takes the cake with 170 million people, because you have Shanghai, you have big urban centers that really brings a huge population. You have the same thing in Bangladesh, which is over 100 million people, but that's more spread out. So that's not a concentrated one. The Nile was not in the previous slide because I did the top 10. So I already apologized to our colleague from Egypt, because the Nile Delta came in 10th in terms of area size, which actually surprised me. But in terms of population, it's quite important for the country. It's 40% of the Egyptian population. So again, it's important just to understand the density, the total population, and the density population, because you have very different approaches on that. Now, that doesn't mean that the sparsely populated tropical deltas and Arctic deltas are not important, because there you have a huge amount of biodiversity and other types of value. So you have Amazon Delta has 100,000 people. Orinoco in Venezuela only has 20,000 people, very low density, but huge biodiversity interests. And of course, the Lena Delta is hardly anyone living there, but very Arctic importance, very important to the Arctic. This is the most important thing, I think, is that the deltas actually contribute so much to the global GDP. And that's important. That's why we need to look at the of the deltas, not just the ecosystem services they provide, but what are the economic drivers? And if we look, and one of the reasons why they're so interesting from an economic point of view is their geographic advantage and their natural resource endowments. And now, because of climate change and because of choices of sustainable development, unsustainable development, they're increasingly threatened. And we have to remember that they're threatened, that that's affecting a lot of the GDP and the economics. So if you think of the 6 main economic drivers in these deltas, I'll put the natural resource based, and the first one could put is natural resource extraction, the extractive one, and that's more of oil and gas, fossil fuels. And you'll see, for example, the Niger Delta in Nigeria, as 90% of exports for Nigeria are in the Niger Delta. It's also one of the poorest regions in the country. We'll get to that. So the equity doesn't mean anything just because you have big GDP. If the equity within that delta, it doesn't always benefit those who live in the delta. And then you have mining operations on the extractive industry side. But then you also have, how do you transfer natural resources using water, soil, and climate into agriculture, aquaculture, food production. And that's what we're seeing in most of the big deltas in the world. If you look at the Mekong, the Brahmaputra, Nile, those are really the basis of economic the economics and the population sustainability in those regions. But even in California alone, you have about $4.6 billion in output and 23,000 jobs. Now you stand to be corrected by our colleagues from California. So that's really, really important in terms of how many people can also benefit from that and the contribution to GDP. But then you have the manufacturing. So you have the big deltas, the Yangtze River Delta. It's 25% of China's GDP. So again, that's very important when you have these industrial manufacturing deltas. They're huge contributions to the national GDP of the country. You also have the location advantage of deltas as an important fourth driver, and that gives you the port operations and maritime commerce. And so deltas also have that advantage of linking you from the land to the sea. And you see that in the Rhine, for example, how important that is, as an example, in the Netherlands. Then you have the urban services and financial centers. That comes out again back to the high value drivers like Shanghai and the Yangtze River. And finally, let's not forget, and I think it's a growing area, is the idea for tourism, recreation, its growing importance, but also around ecotourism. It's about valuing ecosystems. How can we find a way, blue economy? How can we really be thinking? Brazil has really good examples of their bioeconomy that they're doing around that. And I think that's an important opportunity. Now, as I mentioned, though, we have to really think about the equity. Not all deltas are equitable, the GDP within all the deltas. And so you'll see significant differences. The highest income deltas, the Rhine and the Po, Yangtze and Pearl, they're economic powerhouses for the country. They can come up to 2 times the national GDP. On the other hand, you also have deltas that are actually economic drains on the country, if you call it that way, with high levels of poverty. And at the top of the list, I was quite surprised to see the Mississippi Delta. I mean, it's less than a third of the national average of the income in the United States. And you have the same thing with the Mekong Delta, even though it's the rice powerhouse. And then you have, and then you have the Brahmaputra and the Nile, where you have that. So again, less than 1% of the land, 4% of the population, 6% of GDP. I'm going to quickly go through the threats. I think Dr. Chi, Dr. Ni, and Matthew just really went over what the major threats are. We have those that are beyond the control of the Delta regions, what I like to call them. They're by climate change, upstream development, and they're evidenced through the sea level rise, changes in water and sediment flows, storm surges, floods, cyclones, warming oceans. I think Matthew mentioned all of those. But most of the threats are actually human-induced. They're the result of our own development decisions and what we want to do in the poor management. And these are causing major economic, social, and environmental impacts. So we mentioned already the dams and water diversions, the groundwater and hydrocarbon extraction leading to subsidence, but also urbanization leads to compaction and subsidence. We also see the impacts of pollution, the sand mining, loss of habitat, mistakes that we make about building levees and dikes and flood defenses and putting hard infrastructure in, and not understanding that water is always going to, living with water and living with nature, it will always win. Water will win no matter how much engineering you want to put. So I think much of this is due to the poor governance. Now, again, the impacts, I'm not going to dwell on this because I want to get to the next part of the presentation, but you will see these impacts are in terms of economic, social, and environmental. And when you look at sea level rise, you can see how many people are dealing with floods. 630 million people in low elevations are at risk globally from floods. You have the saltwater intrusion. You see it in the Nile Delta. You know that 50% of rice yield is declining when there's a salinity that exceeds 4%. So those are real impacts. I think there's also impacts on social, losing on the human level, health impacts, food security, cultural loss of cultural identity. Also, as populations have to change, also either migrate, out-migrate, or change their livelihoods, and they lose a lot of their traditional ways of. So if we look at some principles of delta management and practical application, so what I wanted to do then is, I'm stealing a little bit from, not stealing from, but building on where does this actually come from when we start thinking about adaptive delta management. And so this comes from the foundation of ADM, really comes from a general theory of adaptive management, which was really developed in the 1970s to manage natural systems with a high degree of uncertainty. Understanding there's a high degree of uncertainty, and it's an iterative process of learning by doing, and acknowledges the fact that there are uncertainties, that are inherent to the complex natural systems. And instead of relying on a fixed long-term plan, it uses a cyclical process as shown on the slide. And so I know Lauren's going to talk more about the experience in the Mekong Delta, in the San Joaquin Valley in California, about how you plan, you plan, you do evaluate, you respond, and you learn, that learning cycle. The Dutch at the same time also, I think in the 1990s, early 1990s to about, during that period, but really in 2009 is really crystallized this whole idea of how you have a holistic approach, an understanding of Delta where you do bring in the science, the engineering, the multi-sectoral approach, intensive engagement with multi-stakeholder groups. You embrace uncertainty with making decisions that are no regret, and you realize that you're working across disciplines, temporal scales, boundaries. And the most important thing is you have a flexible implementation based on learning, adjustment built in, and M&E. So what I wanted to do is take this model a little bit and think about, okay, for us who are on the implementation down at the bottom, what does that mean to us who focus much more on supporting governments and others implement these types of approaches? And so if you start at the top, of course, science, and we know science, this room is great. It's really multidisciplinary. It really covers every type. It's beyond engineering, it's beyond social, it's legal. So the science has that to bring in that multidisciplinary vision, the temporal vision, the spatial vision. Also, I think what's important in science is thinking about how quickly technologies and the way we're learning is growing. And thank you for that last presentation about machine learning. I mean, if you think about using satellites, last 20 years, 10 years, you think about how little. So I think the science part is critical and everyone in the room. Then you have the government policies, institutions, and legal framework under which they operate, the stakeholders that bring in the communities, farmers, private sector. And then you also have the example of Australia. How do you actually take environment, put environment as a stakeholder? The Murray Darling is a good example. And then at the bottom is where we come in as finance and implementation, putting this all into action, and the feedback and learning and adaptation. So I'm running out of time very quickly, so I'm not going to belabor these, but I think the quick messages I'm going to give you on the Mekong Delta. In 2013, government prepared the first Mekong Delta plan. It was very, very much encouraged and supported by the Dutch government initially. And it was a very interesting process because many of us were working in this space, not just in the Mekong Delta, but also with MRC and looking, that was before the first dam, the first Shire had come online, the first mainstream dam had come online. And the process of doing the science and bringing all the scientists together came up with this wonderful approach of looking at different scenarios and addressing all the issues here. But then getting the political buy-in was a bit of a, not a challenge, but that was the next step. And it brought in a lot of the development community and the financing to think through how we could take this forward. And so within the Mekong Delta plan, you had a lot of the development communities telling government, encouraging them, if you go ahead with that, we will support you. And it really focused on looking at three agroecological zones, looking at the Delta from a regional perspective. Several people mentioned this, and recognizing there's an agroecological zone, there's the fresh, there's the transition, there's the brackish, and the importance of living with the river, and that flood management needs to be used to adapt to salinity in ecosystem preservations. And so from there, we at the World Bank, working with government, it took us 3 years to prepare this project. I was working here for 5 years. We had 6 different projects in the Mekong Delta. 4 of them with the Ministry of Agriculture. One was doing dredging for shipping. One was doing groundwater, using groundwater for urban water supply and sanitation. Another one was doing shrimp farming with brackish water on one side. The other was doing rice, and they weren't working together. So what the Mekong Delta plan allowed us to do is come together and working across 3 government agencies in the 9 provinces back then, and the farmers, to think about how do we design a climate resilient approach that gives you sustainable livelihoods, economic transformation, and environmental sustainability. And it really built on the intensive MARD research process. It was holistic. One of the biggest challenges that we had was then, of course, then you put into action, how do you follow the Vietnam budget process and the institutional process? And again, that's a quick summary of the 3 ecological zones. And at the core of the project was really the component of science, of bringing everyone together, and there clear indicators on what you had to deliver. We were there yesterday in the upper Delta. I was so excited to see it, and many of you asked about that, because that was where we're supporting farmers to go from 3 rice crops a year to 2. So many of you asked, why is there water here? And we were so happy to see, because basically those farmers are adopting this new, it's very hard, for farmers to change to new adaptation techniques. So for them to adapt and to this, let the land and flood for one and lose one of their rice cropping seasons, that was intentional. And then what are the other incomes that you can do with them? So how can you do floating rice during the rainy season, floating vegetables? And then what we found at the very end, and it was very, very successful. Again, I'm sorry, running out of time, but there's a video that you guys, if you want to see it later, to watch. But the important thing here is that we saw that it's actually having an impact in terms of the quality of the water and the land and water management, but they had to come together about when do you open the sluice gate, when do you close it? And it was not just about infrastructure provision, but management of infrastructure in a collaborative manner. And then you have the other, down on the peninsula and coastal provinces, you're focusing much more on preventing sea erosion and putting wave attenuation infrastructure, but mangroves, leaving room for mangroves, and aquaculture around the mangroves. And then over on that estuary, which is very, very saline now, move away from just shrimp farming, making sure you have good quality shrimp farming, but looking at salt-resistant crops, especially coconuts and fruit trees. Very, very good results. I'll share it with everyone afterwards. It had direct beneficiaries of over 1.8 million farmers. So really, the adoption rate was really, really high. Which is nice. This was was building on MARD and all the research from the university, and it was no longer a pilot. There's no more time to pilot. How do you go to scale? But importantly is also the regional master plan, the regional data center, and a monitoring systems put in place. And there is now that system to bring everyone together. And in 2022, there was a new Mekong Delta plan that was prepared by the Vietnamese. It was very much with that. So again, I used that learning circle to see what really worked here, and it was really the core of science based in evidence, and that continues. But the government, the institutional collaboration, several people mentioned the 2017 Prime Minister resolution about looking holistically at the Mekong Delta as a region. And during the implementation, it was important to have a unified results framework across the agencies, the provinces. So we went back, and it was really about the farmers. So I'm told to stop. So I'm very sorry. I'm going to skip over the similar experience. The Bangladesh Delta Plan was very different because it was it was very much a political plan. Not the Prime Minister, but you have all of the slides to see that one. But again, translating that plan into implementation was much, much more challenging, because a pie in the sky plan, this is even before the change in government, and to translate it, we were not able to bring the 3 implementing agencies together and ended up having in the same project to negotiate separate components of the project. And it's about river navigation and restoration of livelihoods along the river, and working with the communities and those in charge of navigation and river navigation. But again, it's the learning part of that one is really looking at learning embedded in the design, looking at green and gray experimental infrastructure working together, groins to absorb the energy of water, water and the energy of the water and control river flow. But the communities is how do they get engaged? Because you're actually asking them they're not have the land to farm where they are. If there is a major flood, can they get payable eligible funding? I'm getting really dirty looks here, so I'm going to have to. Okay, sorry, because then I just start talking faster, and then nobody understands. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, let me just jump to the conclusions here. I think what we're finding from our experience, and that was just 2 case studies, that the idea of adaptive delta management is a very effective approach, because it is able to deliver that balanced socioeconomic development with the environmental benefits under the highly complex systems that are faced with uncertainty. So overall, it's been a positive experience in the transfer of knowledge, but really, really important, the institutional appropriation within the legal frameworks of the country, understanding how they're funded, how their funding flows from the national government down to the provinces, to the farmers. And again, that reinforces the importance of planning to implementation, bridging science, policy, stakeholders with this implementation and the implementation learning. So if you take this away into the policy considerations, again, I want me to repeat, I can't emphasize enough the importance of local ownership and institutional policy appropriation, because there's such a disconnect about these big plans that might be 100, 200 page long. And then you want to go on the ground and you want to finance something, or work with counterparts to design a program. And there's that huge disconnect. And you don't always have the legal and financial backing. Very little attention to finance mobilization. these plans have these pie in the sky, $1 billion, $8 billion here, $40 billion here. Our programs are the largest, but it's only like a couple $100 million. So the disconnect, and how do you then prioritize what is important? And so I think that's the reality check. Really, really, really important that there's tangible benefits to communities, and inclusion of everyone in the community, gender, indigenous, looking at all of those. Bringing in the private sector is also really important, which is on the finance side, it's not really been looked at as much. And finally, this whole idea of adopting open systemic learning and flexible approach. So thank you very much. I apologize for rushing, but I have a couple of videos if you guys want to see them later on the Mekong Delta experience that might be of interest. Thank you.